Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is Mia Hanks. She is going to talk to us about surviving a narcissistic relationship. I triple on that word every time. So Mia, if you would like, tell us a bit about yourself and about your background.
Yeah. So my name is Mia Hanks, and I am a survivor of narcissistic abuse. I was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years. And it was a rather long journey, and it took a long time to unwind from that. But fortunately, 29 years into that marriage, I was able to escape. I was able to get out, and after leaving and doing a bit of healing, I decided to write a memoir about my experiences. So yeah, just this past February, my book came out, and it's called Bridemaid, a Memoir. And I'm just really hoping to raise awareness about narcissism and narcissistic abuse, and just hopefully I can help other victims out there.
Yeah. And we will, I don't know if I mentioned this before we started recording, but we're going to put a link to your book and how people can find you in the podcast notes so that people will be able to quick and easy find your book and find out more about you. And I know you have a website and so on.
Yes.
So we'll do all that. One question I wanted to ask you, 29 years. So when you say covert narcissist, I know what that means, but how did you realize 29 years into it, or did you realize much earlier and just didn't get out before then that this person was a narcissist and this was not a good, healthy relationship?
I think I realized pretty early on that it wasn't healthy, but I tried to convince myself otherwise. I got married really young. I was 21 years old, and my husband was a covert narcissist. And so, to the outside world, he was humble and kind and generous and all around, perfect husband, perfect father. And so I think as a victim, you don't get that validation you need for how you're feeling when everyone else thinks he's fantastic. So I think I hung in there for a lot of reasons, but yeah, it just took a long time to put those pieces together. And basically with narcissists, they don't get better, they get worse with age. So each year of my marriage was a little bit worse than the previous year. And, I finally just reached a breaking point where I had to start doing some research and figure out what was going on.
Yeah. And yeah, I completely understand that. So one thing you mentioned was this coercive control. So a narcissist, I know, kind of needs to be in charge or needs to, be in control of things. So kind of how did that play out for you in your marriage?
My ex-husband, correct. He needed to be in control of everything all the time. And if he wasn't in control, it would make him angry. So really it became the lesser of two evils to just let him have that control. And, he could basically get anything he wanted just by, using guilt. And so it wasn't so much that, he would force me to do things that I didn't want to do, or, everything had to be on his time schedule, things that were fun to him, things that benefited him. But they have a way of doing this to where they guilt the victim into just thinking, well, it's just easier to give in.
Yeah.
And so that is how they control every aspect of your life. Yes.
Yeah. And I know, having been in such a relationship myself, that you you forget what it is that you want to do. If you were to ask me when I was in the throes of all that, what I liked or where I wanted to go, I would have had to sit back and think about it because I wasn't used to thinking.
Yes. I had the exact same experience. If you had asked me, what are 5 things on your bucket list, I wouldn't have been able to name one. And so it's just, you forget who you are, and your identity becomes kind of enveloped in them. and
Yeah.
keeping them happy and just not rocking the boat. So you lose yourself to the narcissist.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me about gaslighting. So it's kind of, I know what it means, but I know it kind of making you feel like, you're not very bright, or you're crazy, sort of thing. So kind of, what was your experience with that?
So gaslighting, it's a term that you hear a lot and it's really overused. And honestly, most of the time that I hear it used, it's used incorrectly. So gaslighting is basically the narcissist's way of changing the narrative and making you second guess yourself. So, for example, if I would say to my ex-husband, what you said was very hurtful to me, his response would be, well, a normal person wouldn't be hurt by that. You are too sensitive. There's something wrong with you. And so you really do start to, after years and years of this, you really do start to question, well, maybe I am remembering this wrong, or maybe I am blowing this out of proportion. Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. And so you find yourself, some people will say they feel like they're going crazy, but you find yourself not able to trust your own instincts anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that and lived that. So I totally know what you're talking about. So after 29 years, I mean, how was that in leaving that? You mentioned having kids. So maybe they were grown by then, but I mean, how did you finally take the steps to just say, I've got to get out of this?
The stress that I was living under was greatly affecting my physical health. I was having chronic pain, headaches, stomach aches. I wasn't sleeping, was extremely sleep deprived. And it came down to, it's my health. I have to pay attention to my health. And so I really knew that I needed to get out. But early on, of course, I didn't understand that he was a narcissist. But I ultimately, when I realized I'm going to have to get out for the sake of my health, I started doing some research and on my own, just Googling, things like toxic relationships and things like that. And I was finally able to put those pieces together and realize what was happening. So yeah, leaving is scary. It really is, because you don't know how they're going to react. So that was a big step for sure.
Yeah. Now, how long after you got out of that did you decide to write your book?
So I got out of the marriage. It took me a year to file for divorce. I was in weekly therapy for a year, just trying to sort it all out, just trying to figure out what had happened to me. So yeah, then it took a year to file for divorce, and then it took almost a year for the divorce to be final. It was a very lengthy, complicated, very messy divorce. And then shortly after that, I decided to write a memoir, and yeah, it all came together rather quickly.
So talk to me about what's your book all about? I'm assuming when you say memoir, it's about your story, but what
It
is it?
is.
Yeah. So is it meant to help someone see when they're in these types of relationships, or to, recognize that the way you feel is totally normal because that's how people feel when they're in these types of relationships?
Yeah. So when I started toward the end of my marriage, when I started doing some research and understanding narcissism and figuring out, wow, I've been married to a narcissist for 29 years. I I wanted to read everything I could on the topic. And so I just, it was anything I could find. But all the books that I found on the subject of narcissism and narcissistic abuse were all either written by a therapist or, some sort of psychologist. And it was great information, but it was all very academic. And so I found that all the books kind of were the same. After I read three or four, it's just the same thing over and over again. And what I really wanted to find was like a firsthand account. I really wanted to read somebody who had actually been in one of these relationships, an insider's point of view. And so I just thought maybe a memoir would be helpful to people out there who really wanted to understand what day-to-day life is like with a narcissist. So that's what I tried to provide in my book, just through little snippets, little short stories, just explaining what it's like day in and day out over the course of 29 years living with a narcissist.
Yeah. I would imagine also it was very validating for you because you mentioned that, people in the outside world all thought he was, normal and nice and generous and all these things, but at home that wasn't quite the case. So maybe do you think that kind of was kind of part of the healing process, is really putting it out?
It was. Yeah, it was very therapeutic there was something about, there's just something about when you write, recounting these stories. I just felt like after I wrote these stories out, I could kind of let go of it. I didn't feel like I had to store that in my memory. So it was very freeing to just put it all on paper. It was scary in the beginning because it's hard to be vulnerable, you know? And I think oftentimes we don't like to admit that our life hasn't been perfect. You know, you kind of want to keep up this facade of, yeah, everything's great and I'm happy. So it was really this culminating effect of having to admit that, yeah, this hasn't been so good. And then having to tell these stories but then ultimately being able to release that too.
Yeah, that I definitely hear what you're saying there. So tell me about, if the title is Bridemaid, so where does the title come from? Does that have specific meaning for you?
It's just kind of a play on words. I wanted to find a title that was different. I didn't want it to include the words abuse or narcissism or, toxic. I was trying to stay away from those words. And yeah, it's kind of a play on words. I got married very young and I was kind of made into the bride that he wanted. So it kind of goes back to the whole control and trying to form somebody into the person you want them to be.
Right. No, that I was thinking that's probably what's the backing behind it, but I wasn't sure if you had some other meaning to it that you wanted to share.
Yeah,
So
no, that's it.
one thing I like to do in my podcast is have my guests kind of speak to listeners, like, so what advice might you give to someone who's in a similar situation? So they're in a relationship with a narcissist or live in the same home with a narcissist, whatever, what advice would you offer?
I would definitely want to encourage anyone, if you are in this relationship, don't stay because you think it's going to get better. I think a lot of times we think, well, when we get to the next stage of life, things will be less stressful. It'll get easier if I just hang in there. With a narcissist, it won't. And it's just kind of a sad fact that they just don't get better, they get worse. So if you are in a relationship with a narcissist, I would encourage anyone to safely exit that relationship, because definitely there's a better life on the other side of abuse. And also to just understand that it is abuse that you are experiencing. It doesn't have to be physical. Mental abuse is every bit as detrimental, and it takes just as long to recover, if not longer. So that would be another thing. And thirdly, I would say, and this was my circumstance, don't get in the mindset of you have to stay for the kids. You want to keep your family together, because society does tell us that. And while that's good advice, when there's abuse involved, it's not good advice.
Yeah.
So really, for the kids, the best thing you can do for the kids is get out of that relationship. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And, I had good intentions. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying for the kids. But yeah, in retrospect, that's not the best move.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think, children definitely learn about relationships from what they live with their parents or whoever they live with. And so if they're seeing this type of abuse, they might think, well, that's normal, and then either repeat it as they then get into their own relationships, which I think is most concerning for me. It's like, the kids need to know that that's not healthy and that there are healthy examples out there. So
right. And they, it's all they see. It's all they know. So to them, it is normal when you have a narcissistic parent, you just don't know any different unless somebody tells you. So you can get wrapped up in this cycle of what they call generational trauma. And it's a very real thing. It just carries on and on through the generations. So really staying for the kids is not the best thing you can do.
So how about friends and family? So I'm in this narcissistic relationship. My friends and family recognize it. Maybe I even recognize it, but I don't want to leave for whatever reason. I don't want to leave. How can the friends and family offer support to the person who is in that relationship?
Well, with a victim of narcissistic abuse, it's probably safe to say they don't have a lot of friends. and the friends they do have probably think the spouse is a fantastic person, unfortunately. But yeah, I know in my case, my parents did see the abuse, and they did, actively try to get me to leave, try to talk to me. And at every turn, I just defended my husband. And so I would say that if you see somebody going through this, realize that they're probably trauma bonded, which is another phrase you hear a lot. And it's not that easy for them to just up and leave. There's so much psychological abuse that has gone on, and it's a lot to deal with. So I would say for friends and family, I think be patient, because you can't just say, well, your spouse is a narcissist, you need to leave. It's not that simple, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I would think that would be the case. I hadn't thought about the whole part where they probably don't have many friends left anyway, which is definitely a true thing. So as you look back on all that, what would be something that you wish you'd known sooner that might have helped you during maybe the earlier years of this?
I wish I had known about just general red flags. I think I was young and naive, and you think that you get married and your husband would never, have bad intentions towards you, or would never want to hurt you. I was extremely naive, and I wish that I had paid attention earlier on to his lack of empathy. And that's one of the first things that you will see with a narcissist. Generally, they don't just lack empathy. They don't have it at all. And yeah, I wish I would have paid attention to that. But, I just thought, well, it's just a personality quirk, and I made excuses for him all the time. So definitely, if I had it to do over again, I would have had stronger boundaries, and I would have paid attention to all those little things that really they add up over time, and you realize this is not a good person.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So tell us, what is it? What's next for you? Where are you headed after here? You've written the book. What's next on your agenda?
I'm not really sure. I'm just promoting my book right now, doing a lot of podcast interviews. I just started a website, working on that, and I'll be putting a blog on my website soon. So that's, I guess, the thing that's coming up next will be a blog. Beyond that, I don't really know. I'm just kind of seeing how it plays out.
Yeah, well, you're doing what a lot of people do when they come out of something like this, and that is do things to help other people. So,
Yeah.
the book, the blog, the website, everything, that's part of all that. And I know from my own experience with what I do that I find healing in helping other people. So that's also something I'm sure if you haven't already gotten feedback from people, that they're very thankful that you spoke up.
Yeah, I hope so. I think there are far too many people out there trapped in relationships with narcissists. I think that it's just, it's finally getting some attention, but yeah, I think a lot of people just, they're struggling to understand what's happening to them, and then having to untangle from that and try to find their way out. It's a pretty daunting task. So I really hate to think that other people are, sitting out there in these relationships for decades, when there really is a better life on the other side of this.
Yeah, and it's never too late to take the steps to go ahead and do something better for yourself and leave and move to some place that's more healthy and so on. So I think
Yes, for sure.
your example of having been in there for 29 years is pretty indicative of that. It's like, I'm not going to die tomorrow, so I may as well go ahead and make that
Yeah,
step.
exactly. It's never too late. Right. You're right.
I think that's probably one of my biggest messages I'm getting from talking to you. So we're going to link to your podcast. I mean, in our podcast notes, to your book, your website. It looks like you have TikTok too. So I will
Yes.
our assistant will put all that in there. But is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish today?
Yeah. I think I would just like to tell people, if you're listening to this and you are in a relationship with a narcissist, it's really easy to feel stuck. It's easy to feel like there's just no way out. But I think the message I would want to leave is you're not stuck. You're never stuck. You always have options. there are resources and there's help out there. And while it seems like, an impossibility to get away, it really isn't. And I would just encourage anyone out there that needs to get away from a narcissistic spouse to take that first step.
Yeah, it's great advice. Well, Mia, thank you so much for being my guest today. I appreciate you sharing all of this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.